The woman lying on the stainless steel table had been dead for 6 days, and Elara Thorne recognized the incision pattern because she had made it herself. Her hand trembled as she turned the page of the autopsy file, the fluorescent lights of the city morgue humming overhead. The body was someone else's problem now, transferred to the state examiner after the preliminary findings had been filed. But the file itself sat in front of Elara like an accusation, every typed word a small betrayal. Subject female, approximately 23 years of age. Cause of death, exsanguination, cause unknown. No visible wounds, no toxicology flags, no explanation. Her sister's name appeared only once in the header. Iris Thorne. Elara had not been allowed to perform the autopsy herself. Conflict of interest, they said. Dr. Castellan had done it instead, his steady hands opening Iris up with the same methodical precision Elara had learned in medical school. She had watched through the observation glass, silent and still, as he catalogued every organ, every vessel, every intact inch of skin that should have shown some sign of trauma and did not. But now, alone at midnight in the records room, Elara saw what Dr. Castellan had missed. The bloodwork panel showed a compound she did not recognize, not a standard toxin, not anything in the database, just a notation, unidentified organic alkaloid, trace amounts in cardiac tissue. Dr. Castellan had flagged it for follow-up and then, inexplicably, the follow-up had never occurred. The file had been closed, the body released, and Iris had been the 11th. 11 women in 100 years, all of them young, all of them volunteers, all of them entered into something called the blood trial held in the old citadel beneath Krakow's historic quarter. A rite, they called it, an honor. A chance to become consort to the Vampire King. None of them had ever come out. Elara had tried to stop Iris. She had begged her not to go, had shown her the statistics, the history, the grim pattern that anyone with a functioning brain could see. But Iris had been 23 and romantic and convinced that she would be different, that her love would be enough, that the stories of vampire nobility and eternal devotion were not just stories. Elara had held her sister's hand at the citadel gates and watched her walk inside, white dress trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now Elara closed the file, slipped it into her bag, and walked out of the morgue into the cold Krakow night. The city stretched around her, medieval spires cutting into a sky streaked with light pollution. Somewhere beneath the old town square, beneath centuries of cobblestone and history, the citadel waited. And in 6 days the trial would open again. Elara had already submitted her application. The woman at the registration desk looked at Elara with something between pity and distaste. Her nameplate read Alika, and her eyes were the flat gray of someone who had processed too many young women with doomed dreams. "You understand the terms," Alika said. It was not a question. "I do," Elara replied. "You enter of your own free will. The trial lasts 3 nights. If you complete it, you will be presented to His Majesty as a potential consort. If you do not, the crown assumes no responsibility for your well-being." "I understand." Alika's gaze dropped to the form in front of her. "It says here you're a medical examiner, forensic pathologist. Why would someone with your education want to enter the blood trial?" Elara met her eyes. "My sister was the last candidate, Iris Thorne. I want to understand what happened to her." Something flickered across Alika's face, almost sympathy, almost warning. Then it was gone, and she stamped the form with a dull thud. "You'll be the 12th. The trial begins at sunset tomorrow. Bring nothing with you. Wear the dress we provide. Do not speak to anyone about what you see inside." Elara took the stamped paper. "Who administers the trial?" "The keeper. He's held the position for over a century. The council appointed him." "And the king?" Alika's mouth thinned. "His Majesty does not involve himself in the trial." That was the first lie Elara caught. She filed it away and left. The citadel entrance was smaller than she had expected. Just a worn wooden door set into the foundation of a 14th century church, the kind of door tourists walked past every day without noticing. Elara arrived at sunset wearing the white dress they had delivered to her apartment that morning. It was simple, long-sleeved, high-necked, modest. It reminded her of a hospital gown. A man waited inside the door, tall, gaunt, with the pale skin and white hair that marked him as vampire. His eyes were colorless like ice over deep water, and he watched Elara descend the stone stairs with an expression of profound disinterest. "I am Casimir," he said. His voice was dry, ancient. "Keeper of the blood trial. You are the candidate, Elara Thorne." His gaze sharpened. "Thorne. The sister, yes. You know what happened to her. She died. I don't know why." Casimir's smile was a thin, joyless thing. "The trial is not for the weak. Your sister was weak." Elara's hands curled into fists inside her sleeves, but she kept her voice steady. "I'd like to begin." "Of course you would." He turned and walked deeper into the citadel, and Elara followed. The passages were older than the church above, carved from living rock and lit by electric sconces that hummed with modern wiring. The walls were damp, the air cold. They passed through 3 sets of iron doors, each one locked behind them, until finally they emerged into a circular chamber. It was beautiful in a stark, terrible way. The walls were lined with shelves, and on every shelf sat a crystal flask filled with dark red liquid, blood. Hundreds of them, each one labeled with a date and a name. In the center of the room stood a single chair, high-backed and carved from black wood, and beside it a small table holding a silver goblet. "The first trial is thirst," Casimir said. He gestured to the chair. "You will sit, you will not eat, you will not drink, you will remain here for 24 hours. At the end you will be offered blood. If you drink, you pass to the second trial. If you refuse, you leave. And if I can't survive the thirst, then you don't." Elara looked at the chair, then at the shelves of blood. Her sister had sat here, had looked at these same flasks, had made it through this first trial because Iris had been found with blood in her system. Trace amounts, unidentified alkaloid. She walked to the chair and sat down. Casimir inclined his head. 24 hours, I will return." He left through a door Elara had not noticed, and she heard the lock click shut behind him. She was alone. The first 12 hours were easy. Elara had fasted before for medical procedures and experiments. She knew how to ignore her body's complaints, how to sit still and let time pass. She spent the time examining the room. The chair was bolted to the floor. The table was just within reach. The flasks on the shelves were labeled with dates going back decades, some of them centuries. She recognized none of the names. By hour 16, her mouth was dry and her head ached. She closed her eyes and thought about Iris, about the alkaloid in her blood, about the way Dr. Castellan had closed the file without investigating further. By hour 20, her hands were shaking. By hour 23, she heard footsteps. The door opened and Casimir entered carrying a silver tray. On it sat the goblet, now filled. He placed it on the table beside her, and the smell hit her immediately. Rich, metallic, wrong. "Blood. Drink," Casimir said, "or leave." Elara reached for the goblet. Her hand trembled. She lifted it to her lips and stopped. The smell was not just blood. There was something else underneath. Something faintly sweet, faintly rotten. She had smelled it before in the morgue. Decomposition, contamination. She set the goblet down. "I need to see the preparation room," she said. Casimir stared at her. "You need to drink." "I will, after I see where this came from." "That is not part of the trial." "Then the trial is flawed." Elara stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. "My sister died from something in the blood. I can smell it. If you want me to drink, I need to see your storage and preparation procedures." For a long moment, Casimir said nothing. Then he smiled, and it was the coldest thing Elara had ever seen. "You are not like the others." "No, I'm not. The king will find that interesting. I don't care what the king finds interesting. I care about what killed Iris." Casimir picked up the goblet. "If you do not drink, you fail. If you fail, you leave, and you will never be allowed back. Is that what you want?" Elara looked at the goblet, at the dark liquid inside, and made a choice. She took it from his hand, raised it to her lips, and drank. The blood was cold and thick and tasted like metal and rot. She forced herself to swallow, once, twice, 3 times, until the goblet was empty. Then she set it down and waited. Casimir watched her. "How do you feel?" "Fine. No dizziness, no nausea." "No." He frowned. It was a small expression, barely there, but Elara caught it. Surprise. He had expected something different. "You have passed the first trial," he said finally. "The second begins now." He led her through another series of passages, deeper into the citadel. The air grew colder. They passed alcoves carved into the walls, each one holding a stone sarcophagus. The lids were sealed, but Elara could feel the weight of the dead pressing down from above. This place was old. Older than the church, older than the city, older than anything she had studied in medical school. They emerged into another chamber, smaller than the first. No chair this time. Just 4 bare walls and a single door on the opposite side. "The second trial is silence," Casimir said. "You will remain here for 24 hours. You will not speak. You will not make a sound. If you break the silence, you fail." "What if someone speaks to me?" "No one will." He left, and the door locked behind him. Elara stood in the center of the room and listened. At first there was nothing. Just the faint hum of electricity in the walls, the distant drip of water somewhere far away. Then slowly she began to hear other things. Footsteps overhead. Voices muffled and indistinct, the scrape of stone on stone. And underneath it all, a sound like breathing. She turned in a slow circle, trying to locate the source. The walls were smooth, featureless. The ceiling was low. There were no vents, no windows, no obvious openings. But the breathing continued, steady and deep, as though something very large was sleeping just on the other side of the stone. Elara pressed her hand against the wall. It was cold, but she could feel a faint vibration beneath her palm. A heartbeat. She closed her eyes and waited. Hours passed. The breathing never stopped. Elara sat down, then lay down, then stood again. Her throat was dry from the blood, and her stomach cramped with hunger. She thought about Iris again, about the autopsy, about the alkaloid. 11 women had entered this place. None had left, but they had to have made it past the first trial, at least some of them, because Iris had blood in her system. And if Iris had made it to the second trial, she had stood in this room and heard this same breathing. What had she thought? Had she been afraid? Had she realized something was wrong? Elara would never know. But she could finish what Iris had started. She kept silent. When Casimir finally returned, Elara's voice was gone from disuse, but she had not made a sound. He looked at her with that same cold disinterest and nodded once. You have passed the second trial. The third begins now. This time the chamber was not empty. It was larger than the others, with a vaulted ceiling and walls lined with more crystal flasks. But in the center of the room, standing beside a stone altar, was a man Elara had not seen before. He was vampire like Casimir. White skin, white hair, but where Casimir was gaunt and lifeless, this man was something else entirely. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and he moved with a fluid grace that made Elara think of predators. His face was sharp and elegant, almost beautiful, and his eyes were a deep crimson that glowed faintly in the dim light. He looked at her, and Elara felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. So, he said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with a faint accent she could not place. The sister. Casimir bowed. Your Majesty, the candidate has completed the first 2 trials. Your Majesty, Elara's breath caught. This was the Vampire King. He stepped away from the altar and moved toward her, each step deliberate and controlled. What is your name? Elara Thorne. And you are here because your sister died. It was not a question, but Elara answered anyway. Yes. Do you think you will fare better? I think I will find out what killed her. The king stopped a few feet away and tilted his head, studying her. You are not here to win my hand. No. Then why did you enter the trial? Because it's the only way to get inside. To see what happened. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You are either very brave or very foolish. I'm a forensic pathologist. I follow evidence. And what evidence have you found? Elara glanced at Casimir, who stood by the door with his arms folded. Contamination. In the blood used for the first trial, a fungal alkaloid unidentified present in trace amounts in my sister's tissue. The king's eyes narrowed. You drank the blood from the first trial, yes. Do you feel ill? No. He looked at Casimir. Why not? Casimir's expression did not change. I do not know, Majesty. You are the keeper. The trials are your responsibility. The candidate may have a natural resistance, or the blood may not have been contaminated. The king turned back to Elara. How do you know what you smelled was real? I've spent 5 years working in a morgue. I know the smell of decomposition. I know the smell of fungal overgrowth. It was there. And you drank anyway. I needed to pass the trial. The king studied her for a long moment, and Elara had the unsettling sense that he was seeing more than she intended to show. Then he looked at Casimir again. Show me the preparation room. Casimir stiffened. Majesty, the trial can wait. Show me now. The preparation room was a nightmare. It was small, tucked into a corner of the citadel behind 3 locked doors. The walls were lined with racks holding more crystal flasks, but these were different from the ones in the trial chambers. These were old, the glass clouded with age, and the liquid inside had a dark, oily sheen. The smell was overwhelming, rot and sweetness and something chemical that made Elara's eyes water. The king stood in the doorway, his face carved from stone. How long has this been here? Casimir did not answer. How long, Casimir? Since the trial began. Centuries. And you have been using this stock for every candidate. The trial requires aged blood. The older, the more potent. The older, the more toxic. The king's voice was quiet, but there was a fury underneath that made Elara's skin prickle. You have been poisoning them. The trial is meant to test worthiness, Casimir said. His voice was still calm, still detached. If they cannot survive, they are not worthy. Survive poison. The king took a step forward. You have been murdering women for 100 years because they could not survive poison. The council approved the procedures. The council. The king's laugh was bitter and sharp. Of course they did. Elara moved to the nearest rack and examined the flasks. The labels were faded, written in languages she did not recognize. She pulled one down and held it up to the light. Inside, the blood had separated into layers, the plasma yellowed and cloudy. There were visible particles suspended in the liquid, spores maybe, or worse. This is unusable, she said. Any of these would cause sepsis, organ failure, or worse. If someone drinks this, they die. The king looked at her. You drank it, and I shouldn't be alive. But you are. Elara set the flask down. I need to test it. I need equipment, a lab, something. You'll have it. The king turned to Casimir. The trial is over. No one else drinks from this stock. You cannot end the trial, Majesty, Casimir said. The charter binds the selection process. The council has been using the trial to murder candidates, so I remain without a consort. So the throne remains isolated and the council remains in control. The king's eyes blazed. I have tried for decades to abolish this obscenity. They said it was tradition, they said it was law. But if the trial is completed, the law is satisfied. If a candidate survives, the charter ends. Elara stared at him. You want someone to survive. I have wanted it since the first woman died. He looked at her and there was something raw in his expression, something almost human. You are still alive. That means you might complete it. And if I do, then we end this permanently. Elara thought of Iris, of 11 other women whose names she did not know, of a system designed to fail, designed to kill, because powerful men wanted to keep a king alone. She nodded. Tell me what the third trial is. The third trial was called the offering, and it was the simplest and the worst. They stood in the vaulted chamber, the stone altar between them. The king had dismissed Casimir, who left with a look that promised retribution. Now it was just the two of them, vampire and human, surrounded by centuries of death. The offering is a blood exchange, the king said. You offer your blood freely. I take it. If you survive the taking, you pass the trial and are presented to the court as consort. And if I don't survive, then you die here like the others. Elara looked at the altar. It was stained dark, the stone porous and saturated with old blood. How much do you take? As much as I choose. That's not a trial, that's an execution, yes. The king's voice was flat. The council designed it that way. A vampire in bloodlust does not stop. They drain their prey dry. The trial depends on the candidate's blood being unpalatable, or the vampire exercising inhuman restraint. Most vampires cannot, can you? He met her eyes. I have never tried. Why not? Because I have never participated in the trial. I refuse to be complicit in murder. Elara took a step closer to the altar. But you're here now. Because you are different. You survived the poison. You might survive this, or you might kill me. Yes, she should have been afraid. She should have walked out, gone to the police, exposed the whole corrupt system and let someone else dismantle it. But Iris was dead, and 11 others were dead, and if Elara left now, there would be a 13th candidate, and a 14th, and the dying would never stop. She climbed onto the altar and lay down. The king stared at her. You are certain? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He moved to stand beside her, looking down with an expression she could not read. You are brave, or foolish, you said that already. It bears repeating. He reached out and took her wrist, his fingers cold against her skin. This will hurt, I know. If I lose control, you will die. I know that too. He leaned down and Elara saw his fangs for the first time. They were long and sharp and inhumanly white. Then he bit her and pain exploded through her arm. It was not like she had imagined. There was no seduction, no hypnotic pleasure. Just pure, searing agony as his fangs punctured her skin and his mouth closed over the wound. She felt the pull of his feeding, felt her blood leaving her body in rhythmic pulses. Her vision blurred. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, and then she felt something else. He was holding her wrist gently, almost carefully. His other hand had moved to cradle her head, supporting her. The pull of his feeding was steady, controlled. He was not frenzied. He was not lost. He was counting. Elara's vision began to fade, darkness creeping in at the edges. Her limbs felt heavy, her body cold. She tried to speak, but her voice would not come. Then he stopped. He pulled away, his mouth stained red, and looked at her with an expression of stark horror. Elara, she could not answer. The world was spinning, the ceiling far above her doubling and tripling. She felt him lift her, felt the cold stone of the altar fall away. Then there was warmth and pressure, and something wet against her lips. Drink, he said. His voice was urgent, desperate. Please drink. She realized he had bitten his own wrist and was holding it to her mouth. Vampire blood, the thing that would heal her or turn her or kill her, she was not sure which. But she was dying already, so she drank. The taste was different from the poisoned blood of the trial. This was clean, pure, electric. It burned down her throat and spread through her chest like fire. Her heartbeat steadied, her vision cleared. The pain in her wrist faded to a dull ache. When she could breathe again, he pulled his wrist away. The wound on his skin was already closing. You stopped, she whispered. Yes. Why? He set her down gently on the floor and stepped back, his hands shaking. Because I could. Because you trusted me to. He looked at her and there was something broken in his eyes. No one has ever trusted me like that. Elara sat up slowly. Her head spun, but she was alive. I passed the trial. Then it's over. The charter is fulfilled. Yes. She looked at him. Really looked. He was still covered in her blood, his mouth stained, his hands trembling. He looked like a monster and a man all at once, and she realized that he had been trapped in this system as much as any of the women who had died. A king who could not stop a slaughter. A vampire who had never wanted a consort chosen this way. What is your name? She asked. He blinked as though the question surprised him. Draven Petros. Draven. She tested the name. You said you've tried to abolish the trial for 70 years, and the council blocked you. Every time. The charter binds the succession. Without a consort, the throne cannot pass. Without the trial, no consort can be chosen. They have used it to sheesh me. Elara stood, her legs unsteady. But I completed the trial. That means the charter is satisfied. Yes, so we can end it. Draven looked at her, and for the first time she saw hope in his face. We can end it. The council convened at midnight in a chamber carved from black stone, lit by candles that cast long shadows on the walls. There were 9 of them, all vampires, all ancient. They sat in high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle, and they did not look pleased. Casimir stood at the center of the room, his hands folded. The candidate has completed the trials. The eldest counselor, a woman with hair like spun frost and eyes like chips of ice, leaned forward. Impossible. She drank the blood. She kept the silence. She survived the offering. Casimir's voice was flat. By the terms of the charter, the trial is complete. Then why is she not dead? I do not know, Counselor Varya. Varya's gaze shifted to Draven, who stood beside Elara at the edge of the room. Your Majesty, you participated in the offering. I did. And you allowed the candidate to survive. I did. That was not the purpose of the trial. Draven's expression did not change, but Elara felt the tension radiating from him. The purpose of the trial was to select a consort. Elara Thorne has completed the requirements. She is now consort designate. She is human. The charter does not specify species. Another counselor, a man with a scar running from temple to jaw, spoke. The trial was designed to be impossible, to ensure that no unsuitable candidate could claim the throne. Then the trial was designed to murder, Elara said. Every head in the room turned toward her. I am a forensic pathologist. I examined the blood stock used in the first trial. It is contaminated with a fungal alkaloid that causes organ failure and death. Every candidate who entered the trial was poisoned. Silence. Varya's eyes narrowed. That is a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. I can prove it. The blood stock has been used for centuries. If it were poisoned, the council would have known. The council did know. Draven's voice was quiet, lethal. The preparation room has been locked under council seal since the trial's inception. No one enters without council approval. Casimir is the keeper, appointed by you. If the blood is poisoned, the council allowed it. Varya sat back in her chair. You have no proof, then let me test it, Elara said. Give me a sample from the stock and access to a lab. If I'm wrong, I'll withdraw my claim. If I'm right, the trial ends. The counselors exchanged glances. Varya's mouth thinned. Very well. You have 1 week. The lab was in the new city, a sleek glass building that contrasted sharply with the medieval stone of the citadel. Elara worked through the night, running cultures and mass spectrometry on the blood sample Casimir had provided. Draven stayed with her, watching from the corner of the room, silent and still. By dawn, she had her answer. It's ergot, she said, staring at the readout, or something closely related. A parasitic fungus that grows on stored organic matter. It produces alkaloids that cause convulsions, necrosis, and vascular constriction. In high enough doses, it's fatal. Draven moved to stand beside her. How high is the dose in the trial blood? Lethal. Multiple times over. She looked at him. Anyone who drank this should have died within hours. I should have died, but you didn't. No. Elara frowned at the data. I don't know why. My blood work is normal. No antibodies, no resistance markers. I should be dead. Draven was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I gave you my blood after the offering. It might have purged the toxin. Vampire blood can do that? In theory. I've never tested it. Elara saved the data and turned to face him. This is enough. We can present it to the council. Prove that the trial was rigged. They will deny it. Then we go public. Show the data to the medical community, the press, anyone who will listen. The council can't suppress this if everyone knows. Draven's expression was grim. They can try. The council reconvened 3 days later. This time the chamber was not empty. Word had spread through the vampire community and the gallery was filled with witnesses. Elara stood at the center of the room with Draven beside her, and she presented her findings. She showed them the cultures, the toxin levels, the historical records of 11 women who had entered the trial and died with the same symptoms. She explained the mechanism of action, the dose required for lethality, and the statistical impossibility of natural contamination. When she finished, the chamber was silent. Varya looked at Casimir. Do you deny these findings? Casimir stood motionless. I do not. Did you knowingly administer poisoned blood to the candidates? I administered the blood provided to me by the council. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have. Varya's gaze swept the room and Elara saw the calculation in her eyes. The council had been exposed. They could deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. They could suppress it, but too many people had seen. Their only option was to pivot. The trial is an ancient tradition, Varya said slowly, designed to test the worthiness of candidates. If the bloodstock was compromised, it was an unfortunate accident, not a deliberate act. An accident that lasted a century? Draven's voice cut through the room like a blade. An accident that killed 11 women? No, this was murder. Systematic, deliberate murder, designed to keep the throne isolated and the council in power. You have no proof of intent. I have 12 dead women. I have contaminated blood. I have a keeper who admits to administering it. Draven stepped forward. And I have a candidate who survived, who completed the trial, and who is now consort designate. By the terms of the charter, the trial is complete. The succession is secured. The council's authority ends. Varya's eyes blazed. You cannot dissolve the council. I don't need to. The charter dissolves itself once a consort is chosen. You wrote it that way centuries ago because you never thought anyone would survive. Draven looked at Elara, but she did, and now the law is satisfied, the trial ends, the chamber erupted. Council members rose from their seats, voices raised in protest. But the witnesses in the gallery were louder, and Elara heard the shift in the room. Support, anger, demands for justice. Varya raised a hand and silence fell. She looked at Elara with something between hatred and respect. You are consort designate, but you are still human. Will you claim the throne? Elara had thought about this. She had thought about it during the long hours in the lab, during the sleepless nights after the trial. She looked at Draven, who watched her with an expression she was beginning to understand. Trust, hope. Something deeper. I will not take the throne, she said, but I will stand beside the king as consort, as a human, and I will ensure that the trial never happens again. Varya's smile was cold. A human consort. How unprecedented. So was surviving the trial. The council voted. 5-4 the motion passed. The blood trial was officially ended. The charter was dissolved, and Elara Thorne became the first consort in 100 years. But the fight was not over. Casimir disappeared the night the council voted. They found his chambers empty, his belongings gone, and no trace of where he had fled. Draven sent hunters to track him, but Casimir was old and skilled, and he knew how to vanish. Elara did not mourn his absence. She was too busy with the work that came after. The 12 women who had died in the trial were named publicly for the first time. Elara compiled their histories, their families, their stories. She stood in the Citadel's great hall and read each name aloud, and the crowd that gathered was silent and grieving and furious. Elara Thorne, 23, forensic artist. Dreamed of painting the sunrise. Marta Kowalczyk, 26. Historian, loved old books and older stories. Anya Novak, 19, student. Wanted to change the world. One by one, Elara gave them back their names. And when she finished, the crowd did not leave. They stayed and they demanded change. The council fought back. Varya and her allies tried to discredit Elara, to question her findings, to undermine the king's authority. But the evidence was too strong and the public anger too fierce. One by one, the old council members were forced to step down, replaced by vampires who had not been complicit in the murders. It took months. Elara worked alongside Draven, navigating vampire politics and human outrage, building a new system from the ashes of the old. They fought in council chambers and courtrooms, in the press and in the streets. And slowly, painfully, the Citadel began to change. Through it all, Elara and Draven grew closer. Not in the way Iris had dreamed, with grand gestures and fairy tale romance, but in the way of two people who had survived something terrible together, who had chosen to trust each other when trust was dangerous. They talked late into the night in the king's private chambers, about the trial and the council and the future. Elara told him about her work in the morgue, about the bodies she had examined and the stories they told. Draven told her about the centuries he had lived, about the wars he had fought and the changes he had seen. I never wanted this, he said one night. They were sitting by the fire, the Citadel quiet around them. The throne, the trial, the isolation. I tried to change it, but the council held all the power. And now? Elara asked. Now we have a chance. He looked at her. Because of you. I didn't do it alone. You did the part that mattered. You survived. His hand found hers, his fingers cold and steady. You trusted me when no one else would. Elara looked at their joined hands. You stopped. During the offering, you could have killed me, but you stopped. I had to. Why? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because you mattered. Because I wanted you to live. He stopped, and Elara saw the vulnerability in his face, the fear. Because I was already falling in love with you. Her breath caught. She had not expected him to say it, had not let herself think it, even though she had felt the pull between them growing stronger every day. I don't know what that means, she said softly. You're immortal. I'm human. We have years, maybe decades, but not forever. I know, and I won't turn. Not yet, maybe not ever. I need to stay who I am to finish this work, to honor Iris and the others. I know that too. Then what are we doing? Draven's thumb brushed over her knuckles. We are choosing each other. For as long as we have, that is enough. Elara looked at him, at this ancient, powerful being who had knelt beside her and given her his blood and trusted her to end a system that had bound him for decades. And she realized that she had fallen too, slowly against all logic, despite the danger and the impossibility. She had fallen in love with the Vampire King. Okay, she said. Let's choose each other. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and tentative and full of something that felt like hope. The trial's implements burned on the summer solstice. They held the ceremony in the Citadel yard, open to the sky for the first time in centuries. The crystal flasks, the stone altar, the ancient records, all of it piled high and set ablaze. The fire roared into the night, and the crowd that gathered watched in silence as the last remnants of the blood trial turned to ash. Elara stood beside Draven, her hand in his, and watched the flames climb. She thought of Iris, of the 11 others, of all the women who had walked into the Citadel and never come out. She thought of the system that had killed them, and the work it had taken to tear it down. When the fire burned low, Draven stepped forward and addressed the crowd. The blood trial is ended. By law and by choice, it will never be held again. The throne does not require a consort chosen through suffering. It requires a partner chosen through trust. He looked at Elara. And I have found mine. The crowd erupted into applause. Not everyone was pleased, Elara knew. There were still factions within the vampire community who resented the changes, who mourned the old ways. But they were outnumbered, and the momentum was on the side of reform. As the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, Elara felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find a woman standing behind her, middle-aged and human with Iris's eyes. "Mrs. Thorne," Elara whispered. Her mother pulled her into a fierce hug. "You did it. You found out what happened to her. I'm sorry I couldn't save her." "You saved all the ones who would have come after." Her mother pulled back, tears streaming down her face. "Iris would be so proud of you." Elara's throat tightened. She had not let herself cry through any of this, had stayed focused on the work and the fight. But now, with her mother's arms around her and Iris's name spoken aloud, the grief finally broke through. They stood together in the fading firelight and mourned. Later, when the yard was empty and the ashes had cooled, Elara and Draven walked back into the citadel. The passages were lit now, the electric sconces bright and modern. The alcoves that had once held sarcophagi were being converted into archives, storage, anything useful and living. They made their way to the king's chambers, and Draven closed the door behind them. The room was large and elegant, filled with centuries of accumulated history, books and artifacts and paintings that predated nations. Elara had been spending more nights here, in this space that was slowly becoming theirs. "Are you all right?" Draven asked. Elara nodded. "I think so. It's strange. I spent so long focused on ending the trial that I didn't think about what would come after." "What do you want to come after?" she considered. "I want to keep working. There are other cases, other deaths that need investigating. I want to use what I learned to help people, and us. I want us too." She looked at him. "But I need you to understand. I'm not ready to turn. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I need to live my life as a human first. I understand, and when I do turn, if I do, it has to be my choice. Not because of pressure or politics or anything else, just because I want it." Draven took her hand. "It will always be your choice, I promise." Elara believed him. She had seen him stop during the offering, had seen him fight the council and support her work, and never once demand that she be anything other than what she was. He had loved her as a human, and he would love her as a vampire if she chose that path. But the choice was hers. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For stopping, for trusting me, for letting me change things." He smiled, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him. "I should be thanking you. You freed me from a system I could not escape. You gave me hope. We freed each other." "Yes, we did." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the past months settling around them. Then Draven leaned down and kissed her, and Elara let herself fall into it. Not the desperate, dangerous kiss of the trial, but something slower and deeper. A promise. When they pulled apart, Elara rested her forehead against his. "What happens now? Now we build something better." "Together, together," Elara echoed, and she believed it. The months that followed were full of change. The citadel was open to the public for the first time in its history. Its passages turned into a museum and memorial for the women who had died. Elara oversaw the project, ensuring that each woman was honored, their stories told in full. She returned to work at the morgue, but part-time now, balancing her forensic cases with her duties as consort. The title still felt strange, but she wore it with the same careful precision she brought to her autopsies. She was there to do a job, and she would do it well. Draven was beside her through all of it. He navigated the political aftermath with the same controlled fury he had shown in the council chamber, dismantling the structures that had enabled the trial and building new ones in their place. The council was reorganized, its power checked by new laws and oversight. The vampire community was divided, but slowly, grudgingly, they began to accept the changes. And through it all, Elara and Draven's relationship deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's histories. He taught her about vampire politics and the intricacies of immortal life. She taught him about forensic science and the beauty of human resilience. They argued and laughed and built a life together that felt both impossible and inevitable. One night, a year after the trial ended, they stood on the balcony of the king's chambers and looked out over the city. Krakow stretched below them, ancient and modern all at once, a city that had survived wars and plagues and centuries of change. "I never thought I'd be here," Elara said, standing beside a vampire king planning a future. Draven's arm slipped around her waist. "I never thought I'd find someone who would challenge me the way you do." "Is that a compliment?" "It's the highest compliment I can give." She leaned into him, feeling the cold solidity of his body against hers. "Do you ever regret it? Letting me complete the trial?" "Never, do you?" Elara thought about Iris, about the pain and the fear and the anger that had driven her into the citadel, about the work she had done since, The lives she had touched, the system she had helped dismantle. No, I wish Iris had survived. I wish none of them had died. But I don't regret finishing what she started. She would be proud of you. I hope so. They stood there in silence, watching the city lights flicker below. Then Draven said, "There's something I need to tell you." Elara looked up at him. "What?" "Casimir. The hunters found him." Her heart skipped. "Where?" "Prague. He had been hiding in the old catacombs, planning to restart the trial there. The hunters brought him back yesterday. Is he in custody? He's awaiting trial. The new council will decide his fate." Elara felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. "Good. He needs to answer for what he did. He will. But I wanted you to know first, in case you wanted to testify." "I do." Elara's voice was firm. "I want to stand in front of him and tell him exactly what he took from those women, from Iris, from all of them." Draven nodded. "Then we'll do it together." Casimir's trial was held in the same chamber where the council had once met. But the room was different now. The old councilors were gone, replaced by new faces, and the gallery was packed with witnesses and families of the women who had died. Elara sat in the front row, her mother beside her, and watched as Casimir was brought in. He looked smaller than she remembered. Thinner, older, though she knew that was impossible for a vampire. But there was something broken in his eyes, something that had not been there before. The charges were read: 12 counts of murder, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Casimir listened without expression, and when asked how he pleaded, he said simply, "Guilty." A murmur ran through the gallery. Elara felt her mother's hand tighten on hers. The lead counselor, a young vampire named Lucas who had not been part of the old regime, leaned forward. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Casimir looked at the crowd. "I did what the council asked of me. I administered the trial as it had been administered for centuries. If that was murder, then the council is as guilty as I am. The council has already been dissolved." Lucas said, "We are here to determine your fate. Then do it quickly." The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses testified about the women who had died, about the contaminated blood, about the system that had enabled it all. Elara took the stand on the second day and presented her findings, her voice steady and clear. She looked at Casimir as she spoke, and she saw no remorse in his face, just cold, ancient indifference. On the third day, the council returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was exile, permanent and irreversible. Casimir would be stripped of his titles and his property and cast out from the vampire community. He would live, but he would live alone, cut off from everything he had known. Elara watched as he was led away. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a quiet, tired relief. It was over. Finally, it was over. Her mother hugged her as they left the chamber. "Thank you," she whispered, "for Iris, for all of them." Elara held her tightly. "I love you, Mom. I love you too." That night, Elara and Draven returned to the citadel. They walked through the passages that had once been dark and dangerous and were now lit and open. They passed the memorial hall, where the names of the 12 women were carved into the wall in gold lettering. Elara stopped and traced her finger over Iris's name. "I miss her," she said softly. Draven stood beside her. "I know. She would have liked you, once she got past the whole Vampire King thing." He smiled. "I would have liked her too." Elara took a breath and turned away from the memorial. "Come on, let's go home." They walked together through the citadel, hand in hand, and Elara realized that this place no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a beginning. 2 years later, Elara stood in the same courtyard where the trial's implements had burned and watched as the new memorial garden was dedicated. It was beautiful, filled with white roses and stone benches and a fountain that murmured softly in the center. Each of the 12 women had a plaque, their names and stories told in full. The crowd that gathered was large, full of families and friends and people who had fought to change the system. Draven gave a speech about the importance of remembering the past so it could never be repeated. Elara's mother laid a wreath at Iris's plaque and cried. When the ceremony ended, Elara found herself alone in the garden for a moment. She sat on one of the benches and looked at the fountain, at the way the water caught the light. She would have loved this, a voice said. Elara turned to see Draven standing behind her. "I hope so." He sat beside her and they watched the water together. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, grateful, ready for what comes next and what comes next." Elara smiled. "I don't know, maybe we just live our lives, do our work, be together." "That sounds perfect." They sat there for a long time, the garden quiet around them, and Elara felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Life settled into a rhythm. Elara continued her work at the morgue, her reputation growing as one of the best forensic pathologists in the country. She consulted on high-profile cases, traveled for conferences, and mentored young pathologists who wanted to follow in her footsteps. She was good at what she did, and she loved it. Draven ruled with a careful, steady hand. The vampire community was changing slowly but surely, becoming more open and integrated with the human world. There were still challenges, still factions that resisted, but the momentum was on the side of progress, and through it all, Elara and Draven built a life together. They traveled, exploring cities and countries Elara had only read about. They hosted dinners in the Citadel, bringing together vampires and humans in a way that had never been done before. They argued about politics and laughed about small things and fell more deeply in love with every passing year. 5 years after the trial ended, Elara turned 30. Draven threw her a party in the Citadel, inviting everyone who had been part of the fight to end the trial. It was a loud, chaotic, joyful night, and Elara spent it surrounded by people she loved. When the party finally ended and they were alone, Draven pulled her into his arms. "Happy birthday, thank you." She leaned up and kissed him. "This was perfect, you deserve perfect." Elara rested her head against his chest. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About turning. About becoming a vampire." Draven went still. "You don't have to. I know, but I want to. Not because of pressure or politics or anything else. Just because I want more time with you. I want to see what we can build together for centuries instead of decades." He pulled back and looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" "Yes. It will hurt. It will change you. There's no going back." "I know, I've spent 5 years thinking about it. I'm ready." Draven cupped her face in his hands. "Then we'll do it, whenever you're ready." "Not yet," Elara said. "I have a few more things I want to do as a human first. Cases I want to close, people I want to see." "But soon, soon," Draven echoed, and he kissed her, and Elara felt the promise in it, a future together. 3 years later, on a quiet autumn night, Elara made her choice. She sat in the king's chambers with Draven beside her, and she took his hand. "I'm ready," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the love and the fear and the hope all tangled together in his eyes. "Are you certain?" "Yes." He kissed her slow and deep, and then he bit her. Not the frenzied, dangerous bite of the trial, but something controlled and careful. He drank, and Elara felt her life slipping away, felt the world fading at the edges. Then he bit his own wrist and held it to her lips. "Drink." She drank, and the world exploded into fire. Pain and light and sensation overwhelming and all-consuming. She felt her body breaking down and rebuilding, felt her heart stop and then start again, slower and stronger. She felt the change ripple through her, rewriting everything she was. When it was over, she opened her eyes and saw the world in a way she never had before. Sharper, clearer, more vivid. She could hear Draven's heartbeat, steady and calm. She could smell the blood in his veins. She could feel the power humming beneath her skin. She looked at her hands, pale and white, and no longer quite human. Then she looked at Draven, who watched her with an expression of awe. "How do you feel?" he asked. Elara tested her new body, flexing her fingers, feeling the strength in her limbs. "Different. Good. Alive." Draven laughed, and it was a sound full of relief and joy. "Welcome to eternity." Elara stood and moved to the window, looking out over the city. Krakow glowed beneath her, and she could see every detail, every light, every shadow. She thought about Iris, about the trial, about everything she had fought for and everything she had won. "What do we do now?" she asked. Draven came to stand beside her. "Now we live for as long as we want. Together, together," Elara repeated. And she took his hand, and they stood there, two vampires looking out over a world that was theirs to explore. Years passed. Decades. Elara and Draven traveled the world, exploring cities and cultures and histories. They worked together to continue reforming the vampire community, opening it further to humans and building bridges between the two worlds. Elara used her immortality to pursue cases that had gone cold, solving murders that were centuries old, giving closure to families who had never known what happened to their loved ones. She never forgot Iris. On the anniversary of her sister's death, she returned to the memorial garden in the Citadel and laid white roses at her plaque. Draven always came with her, standing quietly beside her as she remembered. The world changed around them. Technology advanced, cities grew, old conflicts faded and new ones emerged. But through it all, Elara and Draven remained constant, their love deepening with every year. One night, 100 years after the trial ended, they stood in the same courtyard where the implements had burned. The memorial garden was still there, carefully maintained, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been won. "Do you ever regret it?" Draven asked. Turning, Elara looked at him, at this man who had stopped for her, who had trusted her, who had loved her for a century. "Never." "Do you regret letting me complete the trial?" "Never." They stood there together, immortal and in love, and Elara thought about the girl she had been when she first walked into the Citadel, grieving, angry, determined to find answers. She had found so much more than that. She had found purpose, she had found love, she had found herself. And she had ended a system that had killed 12 women, ensuring that no one else would ever suffer the way Iris had. That was enough. That was everything. Draven pulled her close, and Elara leaned into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart against hers. They had centuries ahead of them, centuries to explore and build and love, and they would face it together as they had faced everything else. The blood trial was over. But their story was just beginning.